Headroom is another critical aspect for the livability of your tent. Now, again, that kind of gets back to how tall you are, how big of a person you are. But for me, I would like to have at least 45 inches of headroom within my tent, if I can. And again, I'm talking about a large 3-season variety of tent. This North Face Boulder 33 has 50 inches of headroom. That's amazing. Again, partly being responsible are those vertical sidewalls. But that headroom is critical because you can change clothing easily within your tent. Getting back to the reason I don't like those minimalist tents, like the 2 varieties, the bivy sacks, they blow for comfort. I want to have room to change clothing just to live. Headroom's critical. Now, there's other tents, of course, besides the Boulder 33 that get it right. Currently, and again, very much subject to change, the Mountain Hardware Hammerhead 3 tent exhibits excellent headroom, as you can see. The REI Hoodoo 3, outstanding headroom in that tent. And I will say the REI Hoodoo 3 is very similar to the Boulder 33 tent. And from my initial study and close-up examination of the design, I'm very impressed with it. Also great headroom, the Big Agnes Emerald Mountain tent. And I would recommend being careful of a tapering floor plan, especially if you have multiple people in the tent with gear. This is a good example. This is an outstanding tent, the Sierra Designs Boundary CD. They have variations of this style of tent currently available. But notice the floor plan. It's a geodesic design. It is similar to the other ones that I've shown you, like the North Face Boulder 33. But the problem is it's just not wide enough in this dimension. It does get fairly wide through the middle, and if it maintained that width throughout the floor plan, it would actually be a pretty comfortable tent. But having gone on an expedition within this very tent myself with a buddy, us living in it for 3 days, I will tell you it was just too small. It's more like a very comfortable one-man tent, in my opinion. Again, I'm 6'3". If you're 5 foot, 5'5", probably 2 guys might fit, albeit you're still going to be contending with that width issue. It just tapers too aggressively. My favorite floor plan, of course, is the rectangle. Rectangle. Given certain firepower versus mobility limitations. Looking on the outside of the Boulder 33, you can see that it is definitely wider than that Boundary CD, and it does not taper aggressively towards the ends. You see that? It basically maintains that rectangular floor plan. The downside of that is perhaps you need a bigger site to pitch it on. Okay, so you can't get everything. I'm going to have to find a site big enough for this. And by the way, these tents that I'm showing you guys today are not really pitched for camping. They're pitched for demonstration purposes. I would find a much more level site if I was going to sleep in this tent. This is a 3-season small variety of tent, the Celtic Gunnison 2. You can fit 2 guys in there. It will be tight. This to me is a good survival tent to perhaps be put in a survival kit, and it features a fully rectangular floor plan. You can see there's no tapering at all, and as such, for what it is, a very lightweight 3-season tent, it's maximizing its floor space. Some alpine varieties of tents will be very narrow in width, and that's because they're trying to make a tent that's able to be pitched on a narrow mountain ledge. They're going to assume that you can't find a big area in your above the tree line environment to pitch such a tent like the North Face Boulder 33. Therefore, they're going much narrower, and the trade-off on that will again be livability and comfort, opting for the mobility side of the equation, of course. Given a choice, I'll go with that more rectangular floor plan, and I'll just search out a site that will accommodate it. And it's rare that I ever go above the tree line to camp anyhow, so I can generally find an area to pitch a tent of that size if I look around hard enough. Next up, under the category of livability, is ventilation. and it is critical to your comfort level you're going to have within your tent. As we can see, the Boulder 33 here integrates mesh in the top portion of its tent. More and more you're seeing styles that do the same thing, and it's actually kind of the standard now, and of course I'm filming this in 2009, subject to change, to integrate lots of mesh within a tent. Some good examples of that might be currently, also subject to change, the Big Agnes Seed House, the Big Agnes Emerald Mountain SL3, the Sierra Designs Lightning XT4. All of those designs, just like the Boulder, make a wise use of mesh. And that's because you need it. Remember I said as you sleep, you exhale lots of moisture. And that moisture needs to escape in order for you to stay dry and comfortable within the walls of your tent. If it's warm enough, it will escape through mesh, like this. If it gets cold, i.e. below freezing, you may even have trouble with your mesh breathing adequately. That's because frost will form and clog the pores of, yes, even mesh. But most people camp in temperate climates or days like we have here in the Rocky Mountains, and therefore your mesh will function as advertised. I like mesh. It's another reason I love the Boulder 33, because it ventilates properly and it blows all that moisture generated from its occupants out of the tent. Notice there's different ways to integrate the mesh. Here, North Face decided to use it on the upper portion only, using a bottom solid nylon uncoated variety to perhaps prevent wind ingress from under the fly, keeping the occupants a little bit warmer. That might drive to the 3-season plus type of capability the Boulder 33 is capable of delivering. Other designs, like I previously mentioned, might be all mesh. And with that, at least in temperate climates, you're going to get excellent ventilation and cross flow. However, some people may not dig the draft that it generates. Me, I say you kind of got to live with it. It's one of two things. Again, you can't get everything with a tent, especially with ventilation. You got to make some compromises. Either you want to be, clammy and wet, maybe sweaty, and all your gear gets wet from your own moisture generated, the water vapor, or you can live with some mesh. Here we see again the Celtic Gunnison 2 and how they integrated mesh, kind of along the same lines as that North Face 33, going from the upper portion, solid panels, then doing mesh on the top. The Gunnison uses that same style of design, and it works. It's adequate enough to blow out the vapor because you have good underfly cross-flow ventilation. I'll talk about that here in a little bit. And it keeps the occupants comfortable. Another good example of a Celtic tent, at least as of 2009, that integrates those solid walls and mesh, might be the Celtic Grand Mesa. And that's another great Celtic tent. High value tent, by the way, won't break the bank, well made, and it breathes adequately. Another thing that Celtic does within its Gunnison style of tents and several other varieties is it has mesh on the lower panel here too. See that? And what that does is, again, create that much needed cross flow to allow that moisture to escape from within the tent. Solid wall tents. Some guys will say, hey, Nutnfancy, you like solid wall tents? No, I do not. And I don't think a solid wall tent has been built that will ventilate to the level of a tent like this. It just can't. They just haven't made a membrane that is permeable enough to allow moisture to escape to a high degree to keep keep it comfortable inside. It just hasn't. Gore-Tex not even that way, if you ask me. I've done some hard hikes in Gore-Tex before, and yeah, I get sweat buildup and moisture buildup with inside of Gore-Tex. Another way you can know this, even without ever using a solid wall tent, is just look how your uncoated portion of the nylon of your current tent works. And by that I mean, here we see in this Gunnison 2 some nylon taffeta or whatever it is. It's uncoated, meaning it does not wear a polyurethane waterproof coat on it, which the makers intend to breathe. Well, I'll tell you, having camped in lots of cold environments before, it does not breathe that well when it gets cold. In fact, uncoated nylon will actually coat with ice and frost and act just like plastic, keeping all the moisture and condensation within the tent. and this is a completely uncoated fabric. There's no membrane whatsoever. So comparing that to a single wall tent with a membrane of some sort, that one's going to ventilate even less. Yes, I know single wall tents use a series of air intakes and outtakes, hopefully to create a cross flow. I just don't think they ventilate to the level of a well-constructed conventional tent, especially one that uses a lot of mesh. I have never found a single wall tent that can ventilate to the level of a Boulder 33, maybe a Gunnison, heck, even that Sierra Designs Boundary CD, or the Arc 3 that I'm showing you right now. Some manufacturers will use a variety of attachment systems for their poles. They could use a fabric sleeve system like this Boulder 33 uses, along with clips. Advantages and disadvantages to either way you do it, but talking about underfly ventilation, one of the disadvantages to fabric sleeves is they create barriers to ventilation. For instance, let's say we have our fly on top of this tent. We've had moisture come up underneath the tent fly again, but see how this is a pocket where air can't really access it except perhaps from this side. So the wind blows up from this side, but where does it go from here? It runs into this fabric sleeve, that fabric sleeve, and it only has that small little corner to ventilate. And these are not permeable, don't kid yourself. Whether they're uncoated or uncoated, it doesn't matter. They pretty much don't ventilate well, the fabric sleeves. The upside to fabric sleeves, and there are some advantages, is that it creates a very taut and tight pitch for your tent. And don't underestimate the importance of that either. It's not just for good looks. You want that fabric tight so it sheds rain and moisture and maximizes interior volume at the same time. You know, if this sky decides to turn gray and it starts raining on us, that rain is automatically going to stretch that nylon. And as nylon stretches, or polyester for that matter, it's going to sag, create wrinkles, and those wrinkles will gather more water, and you're going to give the tent lots more opportunities to leak on you. So a top pitch is important, and it's stronger too, in my opinion, a sleeve attachment system. But it does create barriers to underfly ventilation. Some makers have improved this by adding mesh. So this portion would not be made of solid fabric, it'd be made of athletic style mesh, and I do think that enhances underfly ventilation a little bit better. But not so fast. If you think clips are the way to go, there are several disadvantages with them as well. While they are very fast for pitching, they're easy to attach to the poles, much easier than perhaps fabric sleeves, they do not create a tight pitch. You can see that this Kelty Gunnison 2 is just kind of hanging off its poles, and that is very representative of a 100% clip design, at least rectangular variety. Breathes very nicely under the fly, however, lots of wrinkles within the fabric body of the tent. For my money, I do like a composite style of attachment system for the poles, just like this Boulder 33. I like the top pitch. Again, that pays dividends when the rain and snow starts falling, and also for wind resistance too. It's not as noodly. I mean, if you look at like the Gunnison 2 over there, that thing in the wind is going to noodle around pretty well. I know, been there, done it, and it shakes, rattles, and rolls. You can mitigate that somewhat by perhaps guying it out in an elaborate scheme with guy lines that come out all four corners. Maybe creating guy tie-outs on the side of the tent body. That will also create more interior space. But the sleeve construction is generally a better way to do it. And if you have proper integration of mesh like this tent does, you're going to get some cross-flow ventilation. So yeah, I've got some barriers to underfly ventilation, but as the wind comes up under this fly, right here, it hits that mesh. And so it creates a cross flow to the mesh, never mind under the fly, exiting on the other side, which is also mesh. And that is, of course, you know, considering that I keep this frost free and clean, because that mesh can block up with frost and ice. Hey, Doc. What are you doing? What are you doing, sweetheart? Huh? Such a good girl. A feature I really don't see too much is convertibility in tents. This Boundary CD by Sierra Designs is a good example of an attempt to make one tent serve in 4 seasons. And it was very popular throughout the 90s, maybe in the early 2000s, and then I don't see it too much. A convertible tent is one that has basically zip-out panels. This Boundary CD has a zip-out roof. You can see a solid nylon uncoated variety roof there with a full-length zipper running that way. I have it partially unzipped, and you can roll it out of the way, exposing this mesh portion, which theoretically helps that tent survive really warm or humid climates. Again, having spent some nights in this particular tent, it still does not ventilate adequately for me. You may find that our tent like it ventilates perfectly. The problem is, even with that zipper or that rooftop removed, it just has too much solid fabric going around the perimeter of the tent. There's not enough opportunities for the moisture to escape, even with that mesh top. That's why in current varieties you see a lot more mesh. Mesh all the way around, and that aids ventilation. You couple that with a good pole attachment system, good underfly ventilation, and you're going to have a dry tent. Incidentally, notice that the Sierra Designs clip attachment system is very solid for what it is. It's 100% clip, but this is not a noodly tent. You get a very taut pitch with clips, and again, generally speaking, with 100% clip attachment, you will get some noodliness with it. In my experience, not the SDs. They've spent a lot of time designing their clips, and it creates a very nice pitch. And they reinforce them too. Notice in this junction right here, the poles, they actually wrap around with an elastic bungee, adding more strength and more rigidity. These two poles, once they're junctioned together with the clip and the bungee attached properly, they don't move. And that lends strength and stability to the whole frame. Just needs a little bit more ventilation is all. And maybe a bigger floor plan. When you're tent shopping, consider the waterproofing details on your tent. Most quality tents will come with factory seam sealed seams. And what that means is it's just a layer of polyurethane tape laid on top of any stitched seams, so they're waterproof. This Boundary CD by Sierra Designs did not include it, so I had to do it on my own. And what you see is my own job at waterproofing the stitched seams on this tent. Not hard to do. In fact, you can buy that waterproofing from a variety of sources, and it just takes you setting the tent up and then spending a couple of hours going over every stitched seam of the tent. You'll be glad you did it though, because that is probably the weakest area for water ingress within your tent. But most quality tents nowadays come factory seam sealed, and I'm assuming that you're going to spend $200 or around there for a tent, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. They should be factory seam sealed. There are a couple design details that manufacturers use to increase the waterproofness of their tent floors. One is a cadendary style of cut. I hope I'm saying that right. Basically means that the seam is kind of sewn in a curve, an arc if you will. And you can see that this arc 3 floor is actually raised off the ground, at least the seam portion. And what that does is it gets that weakest link, the seam, away from any water that might be flowing under the tent or maybe pooled under the tent. One good thing to look for with tents. Also, some use a bathtub style of floor where the sides of the tent actually extend up. There's no seam whatsoever near the ground, and they actually move the seam up on the side. Another good way to waterproof. Other manufacturers will do a fell lapped seam, and that is fabric that's doubled over on itself and then stitched very carefully, making the ingress of water more difficult. Also useful for waterproofing. Could be good, could be bad, depending on your point of view, but several current manufacturers of backpacking tents do not give you a fabric covering for your entryway or your door. The upside to that is that it weighs less, so you don't have an additional zipper and fabric panel to pack around, and it does aid in ventilation. Like in this Boulder 33, if the wind's coming this way, you can see it'll enter that door and exit out that lower mesh portion towards the back of the tent. That keeps your tent, again, drier and more comfortable. The downside is you can't block that wind out. It's going to come whether you want it to or not. Some people may not like that. If you don't like it, search out a design that has a separate fabric covering for the door. Just like the Sierra Designs Boundary 3D up there, or Boundary CD up there. That has just such a door. But, you know, you don't get something for nothing. You're going to be carrying extra weight around. So be prepared for that extra weight. Wind finally died down at this high alpine location while Allie does some scouting of her own on the hillside nearby. What a beautiful area here. Sun's going down. I better hurry. Got lots more to talk about. Those Quakies stand still in the sunlight. It's a beautiful summer day, July 2009. When I filmed this review of tent features and things you can look for when you go tent shopping, either in person or online. This is the kind of night that you just might want to keep your Rainfly off the tent. As you see with this Boundary CD here. It's about 72 degrees out right now. Beautiful evening. Good opportunity for you to zip that roof open or look through that mesh roof at the sky above and just sit back and relax. I generally will put my fly on because where I go it usually thunderstorms once per day. I'd rather do it in the dry instead of the driving rain. But I, like you, have done many nights in my tents with no fly at all for maximum ventilation and sightseeing. Let's talk about the fly for a second. This is a good Rainfly that this North Face Boulder 33 wears. It's well designed, well fitted, has lots of good features that are all useful. First a note about the coloration. Not perfect. You can see that there's some blues in the grays. While it's a very good looking color combination, I like the grays and the blues, that geometric design kind of stands out. So not perfect. If it were up to me, it would be a light mossy green, maybe a light tan, or just solid gray. But as you will find out when you go tent shopping, you're not going to get all the features you want. Again, driving back to my letter to the manufacturers years ago, I told them, hey, I just don't see any tents being made with all the features that I myself would like. I still don't see it. I see most of them though, and the Boulder 33 is a good example. So, coloration aside, it's a very good Rainfly. The first thing you want to look for, and do look for it, spend some time on this, guys, is a full coverage Rainfly. One that comes all the way down to the ends of the tent. Now, we discussed the underfly ventilation and how critical that is for the comfort for you guys inside the tent. I'm not going to take that back. But when it's snowing or raining hard out there, you might have to at least temporarily sacrifice some ventilation so you don't get soaked from outside moisture. Forget inside moisture. And that's when you want a full coverage Rainfly. And this is a good one. It goes almost all the way down to the ground, but not quite. It is still raised up enough where some wind coming along the ground can enter under the fly and function as we discussed in earlier portions of the videos. Also, it has lots of guy tie-outs. As you can see, there's one on the side, there's one in each corner. There's another one on the front that I'm not even utilizing yet. One right there, and this actually is a guy for the vestibule. I'll discuss that here in a second. The guy lines are a very important part of your tent's waterproof capabilities. Don't underestimate them and don't neglect them. The reason is, whether it's made of polyester or nylon, generally when it gets wet, the fabric is going to start to sag. When it does so, again, it's going to create those wrinkles, maybe some pockets for moisture where it can gather, and you need to continually tighten that Rainfly up as a storm progresses or continues. And that's why you see these adjustment features on your guy lines. So you can tighten them up as the rain continues. Stake it out. Now this is a review setup. Again, I'm not spending the night in this tent tonight. I would have pitched it on much more level and smoother ground if I were. And I would stake it out completely. And actually with tonight, and it looks pretty much like a rainless night, I probably wouldn't have the fly on it at all. But for demonstration purposes, it's wearing it. I wouldn't get too wrapped up about the fabric used in the flies. Some manufacturers will use a polyester. I think the North Face does. I'm not positive on this one. I'd have to go look at my specs. Polyester, they say, has the added advantage of more UV resistance under the sunlight, whereas nylon can break down over time, become weaker, and actually dry rot out. I haven't had my tents pitched for that long of a period where that became a factor. So nylon, polyester, I think either one is suitable as long as it has a good stakeout feature, it's properly constructed, and it ventilates adequately. Here you can see on the rear side of the Boulder 33 where air can enter under the fly. Right through here, another good design of the tent feature. Further adjustability is accomplished on a tent fly by adjustment straps right here. Again, the fabric's going to sag, tighten it up just like so. I could probably improve this problem right here with a tighter or better staking methodology. You see this, how the tent fly is actually draped right on the side of the tent body? This is not ideal. The reason that sucks is because as water comes pouring down this tent fly, it's introduced right into the uncoated, well actually this is coated down here, but into the tent body itself. And it doesn't allow for ventilation. What we want is to have that pulled out from the side of the tent body so we can get air exchanging underneath that fly. I could easily build a guy line using a small pebble and maybe some 550 cord and stake this out like that so the tent fly will ventilate even better. Definitely a possibility.